right.
Yo, G,
Yeah, what's up? Hey, so I
just checking,
just, huh?
just checking in. This is Joshua.
Oh yeah, gotcha. All right. So I just set up the YouTube stream. Here, I'm gonna put the link in the chat right now. As usual, if you need to leave the Zoom, feel free. Or if not, mute yourself on Zoom, announce yourself on YouTube. You know the deal. So glad we don't have to do yeah, I know, dude. Like I said, when it comes to I just have a different approach, right? I need you guys to be hands on the actual, you know, the gear, the tools, or else we're just kind of, I don't know, just me. All right, let's see. Okay, so looks like some of you guys can hear me. Yeah, all right. Looks like I can hear me. So let's get into some of the tools that we use for mixing. Now, I gave you a whole spiel on my thoughts about mixing. Again, if you understand it, great. If you don't even worry about it. It's just my personal view on mixing. But the general idea is that you have a bunch of different sounds, and your job is to balance them all out in a way that makes one cohesive unit of a song, right? So hey, what's up? We're on YouTube. Link is in the chat. I hope you can hear me. If not, yeah, just click the link in the chat. So, here we go. Let's talk about some of these tools, right? First couple of tools we talk about are level, right? When you go to the mix window, again, the way you do that, toggle between the two windows is Command equals, right? Command equals allows you to toggle between mix window and edit window. And when you go to the mix window, you have a couple of tools already at your disposal. You have the fader, which controls the level of the track. You have the pan knob, which controls the pan of the track. Now in this case, I'm just going to focus on vocals just to show you. You already know, but if you play the vocals, let's just play from somewhere here.
But I can give you what you want right now.
And I turn this down, right? The vocals are now buried in the track, and even though they're supposed to be highlighted, they're not. So it's a very, very poor job of mixing.
What's on my mind?
Right? And that's better.
My mind.
Now, we have panning, like I said, left and right. You already know that. But the thing that I want to start talking about is EQ. Now, what is an EQ? Like I said, it's a tool that we use to manipulate frequency, right? Frequency is basically what makes up every sound. So if we just take, let's just take the beat, because we always do vocals. Let's just take the beat for now, right? If I take the beat and I open up that EQ that we talked about, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my track, right? I'm going to go to the inserts section of the track. And if you don't see the inserts, remember, you can go right here to this little white bar area and make sure that the inserts is checked, right? Inserts A through E. Inserts F through J are if you need additional inserts. Now the insert is the location where you actually put in your effect, right? Actually, before I get into EQ, let me just review one more thing that we went over the other day. But there's two ways to apply effects on Pro Tools. One is using the audio suite, which is right up here. And the other way is using the inserts, which I was about to get into, right? The audio suites are rendered processes, whereas the inserts are real-time processes, right? The inserts happen in real time. So what does that mean? So let's just take the very top of the song. It's just basically drums, right? And claps. Oh, well, drums, claps, whatever. And bass. Right? Very, very simple. Now, for whatever reason, if I wanted this entire first intro to to have a different kind of sound, what I could do is I could highlight that whole intro part, go up to my audio suite, and go to, say, EQ 7 band, make a change, and then hit render, right? So for example, I'm going to go ahead and do what's a very commonly used technique called a telephone effect. You guys probably know this. And you're not going to really hear it because there's not a lot of, vocal frequencies going on. So it's going to just sound like a filtered track. In fact, maybe I'll do a filtered thing. Now, if I have this highlighted, if I have this clip highlighted and I have the Audio Suite plugin pulled up, I can hit this little speaker on the bottom left of the Audio Suite plugin to preview what it might sound like. Right? Sounds pretty cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit render on the bottom right of the Audio Suite track, and look what happens to this clip right here. 1, 2, 3. Looks completely different, right? Because now when I close this and play the track again, it sounds like the clip after it was processed by the Audio Suite plugin. Processed. And then once it passes, it goes back to the original beat, right? So that's one way you can apply EQs, right? You can apply them through the Audio Suite method, or any plugin, not just EQs. You can apply any plugin through the Audio Suite method, or most plugins, I should say. The other way of doing plugins is real time, right? So if you click on one of these insert slots, you see you have A, B, C, D, E, and then if you want to, you can do F, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. I swear I have an education. I just forgot the fucking alphabet. You can click on any one of these slots, and when you're on a stereo track, you have the option of a multi-channel plugin or a multi-mono plugin. Multi-channel plugins just mean that it's going to affect both channels the same way. Multi-mono means you can affect each channel separately. So let's just skip that for now and just go ahead, go to the EQ section and choose our favorite Pro Tools EQ. Now look what happens. When I hit play on the song, I'm just going to turn the volume down real quick. And if I start to change this plugin, remember, this is not an Audio Suite plugin. This is a real-time audio plugin. Okay? So if I change something here, you're going to hear the changes happen in real time. Right? Now, again, this will make everything that I'm talking about right now is going to make way more sense if you're wearing headphones or you have speakers, because just listening through your phone is not going to be good enough, or your laptop, right? You're not going to really get the full effect. So either wear headphones and speak, or use speakers, like proper speakers, or you're going to have to wait till you're in class tomorrow and actually hear the difference. It's a big, important part of mixing is training your ears, right? So there you go. You got real-time plugins and you've got Audio Suite plugins, all right? Now, for all purposes, or most purposes of today's class, I'm going to use real-time plugins, all right? So you see that I have a beat, you see that I have a vocal, and then you see that I also created a master fader. I always create a master fader for every single session that I do. Make that a habit, very, very important. All right, so let's walk through this EQ a little bit, right? I know I already went through it before, but I'm putting it up on YouTube so that you can always refer to it now. First up, this is the stock plugin, EQ plugin that Pro Tools offers, right? It's not terrible, it's not great, but it has all the different parameters for you to understand how every EQ will work, right? So if you understand this, you can understand any EQ. It's pretty dope. So let's go ahead and start with the in and the out meters. The in meter is showing you the level of the signal coming into the EQ, right? If you think about the EQ as this block, right? You have a signal coming in, getting manipulated, and then getting spit out. So the level coming in is on the in meter, right? So if I hit play, this is the level coming in. And because the EQ is not doing anything, it's exactly the same level going out, right? I'm not processing anything. Now, you see right underneath, you have an input gain knob, and an output gain knob, right? Obviously, the input gain is the gain of the signal coming into the EQ versus the gain of the signal coming out of the EQ. And you might be wondering, well, why do you need all these different gain buttons and stuff like that? It's what I've hinted to all this time, which is called gain staging. At every single point of the signal, of the signal's path, you have the option to change the gain, right? At any point, whether it's adding gain at the input side, adding gain within the process, or adding gain after the process. Every single stage produces a different sound, right? It's not the same. If you turn the gain up here versus turn the gain up here, it's not the same. And the different iterations of how you can actually change gain makes your unique sound. So if your sound is created by adding gain here, reducing EQ here, adding compression here, and then doing this, that's your sound. And because there's an unlimited amount of those options, you can create your own unique sound that the artist is going to come to you every single time to do, right? That's kind of why there's still a lot of work out there for audio engineers, is because there is a uniqueness to everybody's ear and how they process things and how they affect things, right? So if I reduce the gain of the input, you'll see that the level goes down, right? Now, watch what happens. If I reduce the output, the input level remains the same, but the output changes. Check it out. All right. So you see that the input level is still the same, but the output has reduced because I've changed the output gain. All right. Now you might be wondering, well, why do you need this? Okay, gain stage, all good, whatever. But here's another reason why you might need this. If I boost a signal by this much, watch what happens. What's happening? The input level is fine, but because I'm boosting it by this much, it's clipping on the output side. So what would I do? I would go ahead and click the red little button so that it stops clipping, but then I would reduce the output so that it doesn't clip. It's probably that snare that's causing it to clip, right? But there you go. God damn. There you go. So that's relatively even the same, right? You can even see the levels are very similar. So the levels are same coming in and out, but the sound has been affected, right? So that's one reason why, that's another reason why you choose your output versus your input to change gain. So this is called the 7-band EQ, right? Each one of these little dots is a band. A band is basically the center frequency from which you can then increase gain or reduce gain or create shelves or high passes or low passes, whatever, right? They're just a point on the spectrum that you can manipulate. But these are only 5 bands, so you might be wondering, well, where are the other 2? And that's where the first 2 sections come in. You see HPF, which stands for high pass filter, and you see LPF, which stands for low pass filter, right? And right here, you see these in buttons for both of these sections. And as soon as I click on the in buttons, 2 more bands appear at the very ends, right? So let's just go over one at a time. A high pass filter, as you can see, allows high frequencies to pass, and it cuts off all the low frequencies, and it cuts it off at a steady rate. Actually, it's more of like an exponential rate, a curved rate, and you can change that curve by changing the Q, right? Q is basically the bandwidth, right? So you can see you can have a very steep cutoff, or you can have a very gradual cutoff. It's up to you, all right? Same way with a low pass, It allows low frequencies to pass through. So you have your frequency selection to choose when you start to dip the high frequencies, and you have the steepness as well. So let's go ahead and listen to these vocals and apply some EQ, right? Here we go. And I'm just going to use, let's just use the standard Pro Tools one. I'm not a fan of it, but I want to use something that you guys can use. All right.
Stretched out like a rubber band. She already got a master plan, waiting for me to find out what's in store.
All right. So the next question is, how do the vocals sound? Do I want to affect them? Do I even want to EQ them in the first place? And if I want to EQ them, what is the reason for my EQing? These are questions you have to ask with every single instrument. Don't just slap on something because you think it needs an EQ because that's what you've heard through all the years, right? Oh, add EQ, add 50 hertz here. No. You have to listen, train your ears to understand what an instrument needs and what it doesn't need, or what it needs to fix, right? And then decide what tool are you going to use to solve that problem. So for example, EQs do a couple of things. They can either enhance sounds, right? Spectral sounds, or certain parts of the spectrum for different sounds. They can fix issues, right? If there's like a weird sound, EQs can be used to fix the issue, but they can also help something fit in the context of a mix, right? We talked about how every character has to have his or her own space in the song spectrally as well as dynamically. Very important. Let's say spectrally and spatially. It's way more accurate. So in this case, there's a couple of things that I'm hearing from the vocal that I would like to fix, and I think the EQ is the job to do it. So let's listen. One, if you listen very carefully, and again, this really, really makes sense. Yeah, it really makes sense if you're wearing headphones or if you have some sort of subwoofer in your house. But there's a low kick drum that you can hear in the vocal, which is coming from, I think, the control room. Like, I think this was recorded where the control room, the guy with the console and the engineer is in one room, and then right next door is the vocalist. And maybe the guy in that room is playing it too loud or something, but the microphone is picking up the beat very, very softly. Now, it's not a big deal. Again, you're not even going to hear that in the context of a mix. So in essence, it doesn't really matter, but it's something that I can fix. And I might as well if I can. And it's not going to affect the data too much, right? So listen to that.
I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want right now. Never said
Do you hear it?
guarantee. I shouldn't speak so loud, no. And I say too much. What's on my mind?
It's so subtle, it's like ridiculous. It doesn't even need to be taken out. Check this out.
Stretched out like a rubber band. She already got a master plan, waiting for me to find out.
Now, if you don't hear it, I'm going to make it even more obvious by doing this low pass filter thing, and hopefully this will actually make it audible. Maybe I'll use a different EQ to just go even more extreme, because that's not even letting me. This. You hear that now? Right? So that kick drum is coming from the beat being played in the other room, right? So an easy way to actually fix that is using the thing that we talked about before, which is the high pass filter, right? High pass filters allow high frequencies to pass through, and it cuts out low frequencies. So I can put in a high pass filter. I can make it a very steep dip, and then I can increase the frequency to the point where it cuts out that little low end, low end rumble, which was around 50 or 60 hertz, right? Now, this is a very common strategy when it comes to vocals, right? Putting a high pass filter on vocals is almost universally understood, right? On any kind of vocal track. There's some scenarios where that doesn't apply so much, very rare scenarios, but in this scenario of music, you don't want a lot of this sub information when it comes to vocals. Now, you might be wondering, well, why not, right? Remember how I said everything has to work together in one cohesive space. If you have two instruments that are occupying the same spectral space, they have the potential to be fighting each other for attention in that spectral space. So we talked about this last class, but like think about the example of a kick drum and an 808. They have very, very overlapping frequencies, right? And there's the potential for those frequencies to fight each other for attention, right? And your job as the mix engineer is to make sure that doesn't happen, that it sounds like one cohesive, solid fucking unit, right? With a vocal, there is no fucking reason that you need to actually have any kind of sub information. Why? Because all the information, the important information about the vocal is way above 100 hertz, right? 100 hertz and above, that, well, I would even say 70 to 80 hertz and above. That's where the information of the vocal lies, right? So it's very common to add a high pass filter to vocals. Don't go beyond 80 hertz. 80 hertz is like a very worst case scenario, because if you start to go too high, you start to lose the body and chest of the voice, right? So check it out. I'm going to increase this and watch what happens when I go too far.
Stretched out like a rubber band. She already got a master plan.
Already.
Waiting for me to find out what's in store.
Right? You might be thinking, well, that sounds fine.
Black leather sticking to your
Right? You might think it's fine, but look what happens when I dial it back.
skin. Red lips dripping from your grin. Looks like I gotta learn a little more.
Sounds a little thin right now.
Love it temporarily.
Now we got some bass.
Trying to get you some.
Right? So you got to be very careful as to where you put this high pass filter in. Personally, I never tell people to go above 80 hertz. Like, again, there are horrible scenarios that maybe you have no choice, but usually 80 hertz is like a very, very hard stop for high pass filters and vocals. So I'm just going to, since I only need to get rid of stuff below like 60 hertz, I'm going to put it at like 65.
Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to write.
See, now I can hear the kick drum.
Well, I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what
Now
you
I can.
want right now.
So this is good. I've solved that problem in the vocal. And again, just to be very clear, I'm going to be throwing out a lot of numbers, like 50 hertz this, 4-to-1 ratio, blah, 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 blah. These are just guidelines. The most important thing that you need to do is to train your ears to listen for not only what you like and don't like about the vocal or any instrument, but also listen to how this instrument is going to fit in the context of the whole song. It's not enough to just make one instrument sound good. The instrument has to sound good, but in the context of the entire song too, right? So we got rid of that little kick drum thing. Now the next thing that's kind of bothering me, and again, you may or may not disagree with this, but his voice does sound a little bit on the nasal side, right? If you just listen.
I say too much.
Maybe nasal is not the right word, but there's like a, I mean, I know it now in terms of frequencies, but I would say there is a frequency between boxy and nasal that's really bothering me, right? Now, one way you can find it really easily is to actually boost one of these bands, all right? This is a very common technique. Boost a band, reduce the Q a little bit, and then move the band around to look for the frequency that you don't like. If you hear something you don't like but don't know where exactly it is on the spectrum, this is a very, very useful technique. I use it to this day, right? So let's do that right now.
What's on my mind?
Right there.
My mind.
I don't like that.
So I guess the thought of you.
Right? So all I did was I found the frequency, it was about 600 or 500 or something, and then I dipped it, right? Now here's the important thing. While you're doing this search, you can even call it seek and destroy if you want, but as you're seeking and destroying, there is a tendency to be like, oh, I don't like this. Oh, I don't like this. Oh, I don't like this. Like you'll drive yourself crazy if you're trying to boost and figure it out from that. So what I would say is listen to the vocal on its own first without any EQing, right?
You's just fine.
And then mentally try to actually hear what part of the sound you don't like. This takes a lot of training, right? You have to really envision like what part of the sound you don't like. Just kind of memorize it. Put it into words if you want, nasal, boxy, orange, purple, whatever, right? Put it into words. Try to hear it in your head as to which part of the sound you don't like. Then boost the frequency. And once your frequency span crosses that sound, as soon as you hear it being amplified, you stop, right? So I already know what sound I don't like in my head. I can't get you guys in my head further than that, but I'm going to go hit play, boost,
Just fine, babe.
and then I'm going to slide and stop when I hear it.
I say too much, what's on my mind, my mind. Well, I guess the thought of you's just fine, just fine.
So it's around the 600 mark. So then I'm going to go ahead. Actually, what I should have done is find it, right? Let go, come down to the knob, and then reduce the gain, right? So right here, I'm using what's called the parametric section of the EQ, right? Because in a parametric setting, all these bands, the orange, the yellow, and the green, these bands are actually, you can change 3 of the parameters. You can change frequency, right? I can move the frequency around. I can change the bandwidth, make it narrow or wide. And I can change the gain. I can increase the gain or reduce the gain. So this is a parametric type of EQ because you can change all 3 parameters, right? And what I did was I used the bell shape to find the frequency and then reduce the gain at that spot. Okay? Let's hear the vocals now. Now, one thing I should say is that I didn't reduce it by a lot, right? I did a very subtle reduction. Now, I can hear the difference between the before and after, but if you can't, one method that got me by for years is I would find the frequency, right? I would reduce it by like a significant amount to where then I could hear the vocals, but then I would dial it back to a more subtle position. This is something that not a lot of people emphasize on mixing, but if you have a good recording, and if you want to retain the essence of the recording the best you can, all the moves you make want to be subtle because all the subtle moves are going to add up to a much, much richer picture, right? And you'll only see it at the end. That's the problem. If you've ever done anything in your life, right, it's not something, you don't make big moves every day, right? That's one, you'll burn out for sure. And 2, you won't actually make anything significant, unfortunately. But if you make little increments every single day, that's when you start to see some type of progress, right? Like, and you'll only see it when you get to the point. You'll look back and be like, oh, wow, I only did that for like 2 hours every day, and look at me now, right? So subtle moves, very, very important. Don't go extreme if you can't tell the difference. So now, what else could we do with these vocals? The one thing that I'm thinking is vocals are usually on the bright side. They like to be nice and crisp and, stand out in the mix. High frequencies are good to make things sound sparkly and shiny, but also because we're sensitive to high frequencies, it also allows it to pop more in the actual song. So one thing I could do is, if I go to the very end, the blue little band over here, this is actually set to a shelf. You can see right here, this little thing right over here. This is a shelf. Why is it called a shelf? Because if I boost the gain, it looks like a shelf, right? And I can say, you know what, from like about 5,000 to 6,000 hertz and above, boost all frequencies. So check it out. Let's listen and see how it changes.
I say too much, what's on my mind,
Right?
my mind.
So there you go. I've EQ'd vocals.
So I guess the thought of you's just fine.
I want to get rid of
Just
that.
fine, babe. I say too much? What's on my mind?
There we go.
My mind. So I guess the thought of you's just fine.
Now, I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to see if I can take this low band. You see you have a high shelf and a low shelf, but each shelf can actually be turned into a bell shape as well. Right? Just from these buttons. I'm going to see if there's any point in me adding some bass to the voice. No.
Just fine, babe. So I say too much. What's on my mind?
Maybe a little.
My mind. I say too much. What's on
So this is
my
before?
mind? My mind.
That's after. So again, it's a subtle change, but there is a difference. And this is kind of where ear training comes in. Now, if you want to listen to a before and an after, you have to hit this bypass button on the plugin. It sounds like he's full of damn mucus. Yeah, bypass right here. Bypass means that the plugin is not processing the audio. The signal is just passing through, not being affected. And when you take it off, that's when you hear the effects, right? You can also do this through a shortcut by holding Command and clicking on the plugin. Right? There you go. Let's listen one more time.
I say too much. What's on
I actually don't like that low.
my mind? My mind. So I guess the thought of you's just fine. Just fine, babe.
There you go. So that's some basic EQing of vocals. Let's EQ the beat and see what we want out of the beat. Remember, the vocals not only has to work on its own, but it has to work in the context of the beat as well. But for now, let's just listen to the beat and see where that is. Okay, so there's more instruments. Let's open that same EQ. So there you go. So that's something that you could do too. I figured out how to connect it to my TV. Ooh, nice. So you got like a sound bar or something. You probably have a sub. That's the way to go. Nice. Yeah, if you have a TV and literally just go to YouTube and go to my channel, it's probably streaming live right now. So what I've done is I boosted a little bit of the low end to get some of that kick drum, that thump out of the kick drum. It's around 60 hertz. Very, very subtle. I boosted some of the upper mids because I wanted that kind of, what's it called? Vibey keys to come out. Remember, the problem is we're dealing with one track. We don't have the separate instruments. It's basically a 2-track. And you might be in this scenario sometimes, right? So I'm getting rid of something around the upper highs, lower highs, so that the vocals can kind of sit in. But I am boosting the super highs just to get a little bit more crisp sound out of the hi-hats, right? So there you go. I'm not too worried about how the vocals are going to sit. It's going to sit fine. What's your go-to plugin for mixing MP3s? It's called Call the Fucking Artist and be like, yo, motherfucker, give me the fucking weight. No, if you have MP3s, that's all you got, right? When you import MP3s, you have the option to convert them but it's not. If it is what it is, it's what it is, right? Everything that I'm talking about applies to whatever wave files you get into your DAW. The problem is with MP3s, they're lower quality, so you're kind of stuck. There's no solution other than getting the actual wave file. So, too bad. So there you go. We've just applied EQ, and now we can listen to, if we want to, we can listen to the difference, right? But before that, I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay.
Love it temporarily, in love trying to get you some. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to run. Well, I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want right now. Never said guarantee, I shouldn't speak so loud.
Listen to that voice.
And I say too much, what's on my mind, my mind. So I guess the thought of you's just fine, just fine, babe.
Right? So listen to what, I don't know if you heard what I was doing, but basically I was bypassing both EQs. Now, if you want to know how to do that, it's easier if I explain it in the mix window, right? If you're in the mix window and you want to bypass all the plugins below a certain insert, the shortcut is Control Option, right? So if I hold Control and Option and click on this plugin, it will bypass all the plugins on this row and below that row. So check it out. Boom. Right? Just click Control Option and click. So if I did it here, it would do all of them. Right? I'm keeping the limiter on just for volume purposes, so don't worry about that. So let's listen to the song before and after EQ. It's a subtle change. If you're wearing headphones or have proper speakers and really listen properly, you will hear the difference. Again, ear training, most important part here. So check it out. Before.
So I guess the thought of you's just fine.
And after.
Just fine, babe.
I'm going to keep turning it on and off.
I say too much, what's on my mind, my mind. Well, I guess the thought of you's just fine.
It's subtle. Hopefully you can hear it. If not, don't worry. Keep training your ears to listen to these differences. Again, when you're starting out, you're not going to hear these changes. You're probably going to hear things like this or like this, right? Don't worry about that. Do that and dial them back a little bit and try to listen to the differences before and after, okay? It'll only come with practice and time. So it's nothing I can like just instill in you right now, unfortunately. So there you go. We've handled EQ. Now, one thing we could actually do is, remember, we have two tracks, a beat and a vocal, and then both of these are going to the master fader. So what I could do is I could put an EQ on the master fader. Now you might be wondering, well, why would I do that? If there's EQ on both of these, why would I put an EQ on the master? Gain staging, signal flow, these are the key ingredients. This is the key concept, which is EQing one track is different from EQing multiple tracks, right? EQing a beat and a vocal separately is different from EQing them both together, because separately they're one signal, together they're another signal, and how you EQ them varies the sound. So I could literally put an EQ on the master fader. Again, I'm just going to put the limiter up before, and then let's go to a part of the song.
Black leather sticking to your skin.
And then do an overall EQ, right? Now, this would be something that kind of helps the song either open up or helps all the instruments cohesively switch up the shape. So basically what I'm doing is I'm applying an EQ for the overall effect of the track. And the only thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to boost the high end a little bit over here.
Red lips dripping from your grin. Looks like I got
Maybe I'll get rid of some. I'll get rid of some of that. There you go.
Love it temporarily in love, trying to get you some. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to run. Well, I can't.
All right, so now let's listen to the difference. Actually, I'm gonna try to do this for now.
Can't give you what you
This is
need,
before.
but I can give you what you want right now. Never said guarantee. I shouldn't speak so
And
loud.
after.
And I say too much. What's on my mind? My mind.
Before.
So I guess the thought of you's just fine.
Right? It's a lot more crisp. Now, personally, that might be a little bit too much high end for this kind of vibe of a song, so I'm going to turn this back down and go with that. All right. So there you go. EQ. So remember, the EQ I used on the vocal not only to enhance sound, but to fix the issue. And the EQ that I used on the beat was to enhance certain sounds, create space for the vocal, right? Because I did that little dip. And then the EQ that I put on the master fader was to affect the entire song, open it up a little bit with a little bit of top end, a little bit of dip in the mids, right? Just to kind of clean shit up. All right. So EQs done. Now I want to go into compression. All right. Hopefully you guys are still with me. I'm going to go to my inserts, click, and open up the plugin, go to Dynamics because that's where compressors live, and use the Pro Tools standard Dyne 3 compressor limiter mono. All right, so a compressor is a tool that allows you to control the dynamics of an instrument. So remember, with vocals, you have vocals that can be very, very variable in terms of level, right? So what I mean by that is that you have vocals that are very, very soft and very, very loud, right? Because you're hearing my voice super consistently because I'm compressing my voice. It's not because I have great control over my voice. It's because there's a tool that's helping me do that. So this is what a compressor does. It allows you to take the high points of a signal and push them down closer to the low points of a signal, right? So you have the softest point in the signal and the loudest point in the signal, and a compressor just basically does this. That's it. That's all a compressor does, right? So compression is really, if you have a singer with a lot of power in their voice, it can be difficult. Yes and no, right? It depends. It's not so much about power, it's more about can they control it? Because again, this is more like vocals and advanced singing and stuff, but like I love singers who can belt it. Like I really, really do. I love recording them because that power and aggression is there. But if they don't know how to tame it at the same time while also maintaining emotion, feel, and relative level, it's very, very difficult to sort out later on. And it takes a lot of encouraging them and stuff like that. So power is great, but control over your vocals is way more important to me, right? So compression is one of the tools, one of the hardest tools to understand, and then it's one of the hardest tools to master. And it's also one of the hardest tools to hear. So this is very, very yeah, exactly. Oh, shit. Hannah, you and I are one mind, right? So compression is the hardest thing to understand technically. It's the hardest thing to hear orally, and it's the hardest thing to master as an engineer, right? So if you don't hear anything, don't fucking worry. It'll come to you as you train more and more and more, listen more and more, try more and more different settings again and again and again, and eventually it will knock itself into you. So in order to understand compression, you got to first think about a variable signal. So something that gets super soft and super loud, that has super high points like peaks or transients, and that has like an average, right? Now the question is, whenever those peaks happen, I want something to control the peaks so that they're not as high. That's what a compressor does. And it does that by using a couple of different parameters. The first one is called the threshold. The threshold is the point after which, the level after which compression starts, right? So if my signal is here and my threshold is up here, nothing is going to happen. There's no compression happening. Only when the signal crosses the threshold does the compressor actually push it down. All right. So this orange little triangle over here, which can also be changed by this knob over here, is the threshold. Now look, I'm going to set the threshold all the way up so that no compression is going to happen at all on the vocals. So check it out.
Never said guarantee.
So you can see that the in meter and the out meter are exactly the same. You can even see visually over here that the signal is basically following a linear path, which is whatever comes in, comes out.
And I say too much.
Straight line.
On my mind.
So no compression happening. Now look, let's see what happens when I bring the threshold lower and have the signal cross the threshold.
My mind.
Right?
So
a couple of things happen. For one, you see that the in meter and the out meter read differently now.
Well, I guess
this one's softer. It's softer because the threshold's been crossed and the compressor is pushing down on the signal. By how much is it reducing the level by? That's where this GR meter comes in, or gain reduction meter. You see this little red line? This is telling you that there's 6 dB of gain reduction between the input and the output. So if I bring the threshold lower and lower, you're going to get more and more gain reduction.
I just find it. So I say too much.
Right? Got 30 dB of gain reduction. And if I increase the threshold,
all right. So I guess the thought.
Exactly. So first thing, the signal crosses the threshold and now compression is actually happening. But how much compression is happening? That's what the ratio is for. The ratio says if you have your threshold over here and your signal crosses the threshold by, let's say, 3 dB, and your ratio is 3:1, then your compressor will push it down to 1 dB above the threshold. So ratio is 3:1. Your signal crosses the threshold by 3 dB and gets pushed down to 1 dB above the threshold. 3 dB above the threshold gets pushed down to 1 dB above the threshold. That's ratio. A very common ratio with vocals is like 4:1, 3:1. If your vocals haven't been compressed very well on the way in during recording, maybe a 6:1 ratio in those extreme cases, and then 8:1 is like ridiculous, right? But you can go higher and higher and higher depending on what your vibe is, right? So for now, I'm going to go with like a 6:1 because I think I could, or I'm going to go with I'll go with a 5:1. Let's cut the difference, right? So this means that once the signal crosses the threshold by 5 dB, it will get reduced to 1 dB above the threshold and everything in between, right? So if it's crossing the threshold by 10 dB, then it gets pushed down to 2 dB above the threshold, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or if it crosses the threshold by 2.5 dB, then it gets reduced to 0.5 dB. It's all ratio based, right? Then there's attack and release, right? Actually, before I go into that, look what happens to this little graph over here. The signal is normal all the way up to the threshold, and then after the threshold, it goes red and gets reduced and follows this line.
Just fine.
I'm going to reduce it a little bit more.
I say too much, what's on my mind? My mind. So I guess the thought of you.
Right? Now, attack and release. I'm going to favorite and bookmark this. Well explained. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. attack and release. So you have your threshold. Once the signal crosses the threshold, the compressor kicks in. But how fast does it kick in? Does it kick in immediately? Does it wait a certain amount of time? That's what the attack is for. So the attack determines how fast your compressor actually starts to push down on the signal. So if you have a fast compressor, which is like 10 milliseconds or less, then as soon as the signal crosses the threshold, it's going to push down on it. This is great for when you want to even signals out because you want to catch all the initial transients of the instrument. So in this case, when you have a vocal that's maybe, using a lot of plosives or consonants or spiky sounds, you want to be able to catch those transients and even them out, right? Like I said, you have your soft signal, loud signal, and you want to reduce it so that they're much more evened out. That's what I'm trying to do in this case. So I'm going to leave the attack as is. The release is how fast does the compressor stop compressing once it's done, right? And this is a little bit more confusing to understand, and it's not something I can really give you a certain guideline for. It's really based on the tempo of the song and the flow of the actual instrument. Because if you release too fast, it could sound unnatural. But if you can release too slow, then your compressor might not fully let go before the next compression, and that will add up compression over the course of the song. So watch what happens. If I set it to a fast release, you might not be able to hear the difference too much, so it might sound okay.
It's just fine.
I'm going to go to another part because that's getting boring.
I say too much, what's on my mind?
Sounds fine, right? Now look what happens if I increase the release too much, right? We're getting like 6 dB of gain reduction initially. Watch what happens now.
And I say too much, what's on my mind? My mind. So I
You can even hear it.
guess the thought of you's just fine.
See how it's getting more and more towards like 10 dB of gain reduction, even close to 12. So set your release according to when you want the compressor to let go. And this is really based off of feel and like the tempo of the vocal. Like how smoothly do you want the compressor to push down and then let go? It's really a feel-based thing, and I wish I could tell you more than that, but that's really what it is.
And I say too much, what's on my mind? My mind. So I guess the thought of...
Now here's the thing. I'm compressing it in a way that I can hear it. If you can't hear it, don't worry. The one thing that is very common to do is to completely crush the vocals and have them completely evened out, right? Again, nothing wrong with that for certain genres, right? But in this genre, you do need a little bit of that push and pull. It's very important in terms of like R&B, especially jazz and classical. Oh my God, you can't live without dynamics, right? It's blasphemy. So I don't want to kill the push and pull of the vocals, but I don't want them to be so different, right? I don't want them to be so dynamic. And that's why I'm compressing about 3 dB of compression, I think.
Views just fine.
Yeah, 3 to 6 dB.
Just fine, babe. So I say too much, what's on my mind?
Now, because I'm reducing 3 to 6 dB, I'm getting 3 to 6 dB of gain reduction. LOL, you'd be insulting the composer. Exactly. Certain genres are just not written to be super evened out. Just like hip hop is not written to be super dynamic, right? It can have dynamics within it, but it's not written to be super dynamic like a movie or a classical piece. It doesn't work like that. So understanding your genre is also a big part of this. So because I've reduced the, I have gain reduction between 3 to 6 dB, a natural thing to do is make that gain back up. If you're reducing the signal by 3 to 6 dB, you might as well make that gain back up. And you do that using the makeup gain or the gain knob over here. So I'm just going to turn this up.
My mind. Well, I guess the thought of you's just fine. Just fine. Guess the thought of you's just fine. Just fine, babe. So I say too much what's on my mind.
I'm going to go with that for now, right? Finally, I want to touch on this idea of a limiter, all right? So at the very bottom of this track, this vocal track, and this is very common, very, very common strategy, but I'm going to open up inserts F through J, and at the very last insert, I'm going to put a limiter plugin, right? The Pro Tools default one is called Maxim. Just think of a limiter as a very fast compressor with a high ratio, like 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1, right? Very, very hard compressor. That's the best way to look at it. Yeah, that's fine. So the main things that I want you to learn from this limiter is the threshold, which is kind of like the compressor. As you reduce the threshold, it's going to get louder and louder and louder. Check this out. But it's also going to compress.
I say too much what's on my mind.
Right, you can hear it getting louder.
My mind.
Right, so I don't want to do that. I don't want to get it louder. But what I do want to do is usually setting a ceiling of about 0.1 dB is common so that if there are any peaks that you missed, it won't clip the actual track. In fact, the limiter will catch it. Right? Very, very common. A limiter is almost always used on the master fader or your mix bus. Like I have my ceiling output set to, okay, negative 0.01 or whatever it is, right? So it's just to catch that anything, if it was to like pop up and clip the actual track, I just cut it off right there. You don't want to set your compressor or limiter, I'm sorry, your limiter too hard on the ceiling side most of the time. So anyway, we've got some vocals evened out. Going to go to the beat. Now let's talk about compression on this beat, because I'm going to do something slightly different. Using the exact same compressor, instead of evening out the beat and making it sound more leveled out, I actually want to emphasize the pump of the beat, make it slightly punchier, if you will, right? Everything remains exactly the same in terms of application. The only difference is I'm going to set the attack slower. What that means is I set the attack to about 25 to 30 milliseconds, and this allows the initial kick drum and the initial hits to pass through the compressor unaffected, and then the compressor is going to compress right after that. That gives the illusion that the kick or the transient is sharper or has more peak than the tail. Right? It's louder than the actual tail because the compression only happens after the initial hit. That illusion, that difference between the two, is what gives you the illusion that something's punchy or something hits harder. That's where it comes from. So compression with a fast attack is good for evening out vocals or evening out instruments. Compression with a slow attack is good for making things punchy. Now you can do that on vocals too. If you've ever listened to like a punk band and you've ever wondered why are their vocals sound so spiky and like spitty, like he's spitting shit right in the microphone, they probably used a compressor with a slightly slower attack so that you can emphasize all those actual fucking curse words, you know? Very, very common strategy. Also, when you want to make a kick drum sound more punchy, compressor with a slow attack. These are like the general guidelines that actually make records, right? So let's do this. Again, I'm going for subtlety. I'm not going to go for huge amounts of gain reduction, right? I'm not going for this. Subtlety, maybe 3 dB. That's too much. Now I'm clipping over here, so I'm going to reduce the gain back to 0. It's also making the snare punchier too, I just noticed. So now I'm going to bypass this and see if it, makes a difference to me. Listen especially to the kick drum and the snare. I mean, it's pretty if it's not obvious to you, it doesn't matter, but maybe you can feel it when it's not bypassed. It's got a little bit more oomph to it, right? That's all I'm doing, right? Now, I personally think that's a little too much on the gain reduction side, so I'm going to reduce it a little bit. Cool. So there you go. We've used EQ and compression to vary the song up. Now here's the fun part. This is the most fun part whenever I mix, is to go before and after. And because I already showed you the technique of Control Option to bypass all the plugins, man, this is where the fun starts, right? I fucking love doing this because it gives you that sense of progress. Like, oh, okay, it is better. Like, well, let's wait and see. So this is before.
Love it temporarily, in love trying to get you some.
After.
Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to run. Well, I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want right now.
Before, so I had to adjust that level because the vocals are way too loud, and before I did that.
And I say too much, what's on my mind, so I guess the thought of you's just fine, just fine, babe.
I'm gonna reduce the vocals again.
So I say too much, what's on my mind,
So before.
Well, I guess the thought of you's just fine.
Let's go to another section, do a before and after. So whenever these things are dark blue, they're bypassed, and then when they're gray, they're on. So I'm just not going to talk, I'm just going to let you listen.
But when you say it got me, I start to go and get cold feet. Now I might leave some things unsaid, but I ain't leaving nothing. Shit. Untouched, baby's just too good to be just good enough. Love it temporarily, I just call it like I see it, yeah. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to leave. Well, I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want right now. Never said guarantee, I shouldn't speak so loud, no. And I say too much.
Yeah, Ty, very good point. Like, don't just listen to the volume change or the frequency change. Like, those are a little bit more obvious. Like, really listen to the punch in the drums and the evenness of the vocals as well. Because compression, again, is the hardest thing to hear, right?
And I say too much, what's on my mind.
Right? Versus.
And I say too much, what's on my mind,
So let's take a section and loop it, so maybe that'll be even more clear. So before.
Love it temporarily, I just call it like I see it, yeah. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to leave.
Now with the effects.
Love it temporarily, I just call it like I see it, yeah. Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to leave.
Right? So there you go. It's pretty, yeah. So not only did we create space spectrally in terms of frequency, but we've also kind of balanced the levels out. Now, personally, I do think the vocals are still a little too loud.
Untouched, baby's just too good to be just good enough. Love it temporarily, I just call it like I see it, yeah.
There you go.
Say what you won't do for me, then force me not to leave. But I can't give you what you need, but I can give you what you want right now. Never said guarantee.
Anyway, hopefully you guys can hear that difference. It's pretty, it's not subtle, although it's subtle, but it's not so subtle that you can't detect it, right? So we used EQs and dynamic plugins or compressor plugins, right? And a limiter is basically a compressor. And we use them in real time so we can always go back and change them when we want to, right? But the very top of the song we use is an audio suite, right? So the problem with an audio suite is I can't undo it now because it's so many steps back, right? So either I have to drag this back out and go to the beginning, or there's another method called automation, which we'll get into in like a week or two.
Stretched out like a rubber band.
So look, already, like if we talk about storytelling and stuff, if you give your story like a proper build up and sense of flow and direction, treat your song like that too, and it'll give you so much more of a feeling and an impact. So like even just having a little bit of a fade in the intro and using the audio suite plugin to create that kind of filtered effect.
Stretched out like a rubber band.
Right? Just having that variation, that's flow right there. What tool do you use on certain points of his vocals? Yeah, so this is a great point, right? And this is where we get into something called automation. So I'm not going to go into that now. Compression is good to even out vocals in a general setting, but if you want to get fine-tuned and actually go all in, that's where automation comes in. Automation is like the last 10% that differentiates a decent mix engineer from a great mix engineer. Or let's say a good mix engineer from a great mix engineer. Automation is the key to everything, or key to that in particular. All right, cool. So that was a lot. So let's take it back to Zoom real quick.